Imagine you are an operator of the world's most sophisticated defense system. On your screen, 300 points appear simultaneously. Drones and missiles at every altitude envelope. You activate everything. Each layer responds, and 99% of them work. In April 2024, this actually happened, and the entire world celebrated. Then Iran launched 10 hypersonic missiles in a matter of minutes, and the system that had stopped 300 couldn't deal with 10. How is that possible? How do you stop 300 and fail with 10? The answer isn't in bad luck. It's not in human error. It's not in intelligence failure. The answer lies in physics, in the mathematics of modern warfare, and in a doctrine that Iran patiently built over years while Western analysts looked at the wrong numbers. Analysts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies had already documented that systems like the Arrow have specific structural limitations against hypersonic threats. But the warning stayed in the reports. In this video, I'll show you exactly what Iran learned from each of the two previous attacks in 2024, and how that learning was transformed into a hypersonic salvo calibrated to collapse the decision window of the world's most tested defense system. You'll understand why 10 synchronized missiles can achieve what 300 conventional projectiles cannot, and why this changes the defense calculus for any Western system operating under the same assumptions the Israeli system was using until now. To understand why the system failed, you need to understand what it was built to do, and, more importantly, what it was never designed to face. Israel's air defense system is composed of 3 main layers. Each operates in a different altitude and range envelope, covering a different spectrum of threats. Together, they were presented for decades as the world's most sophisticated multi-layered architecture. And for a long time, that title was justified. The first layer is the Iron Dome. It was developed to intercept short-range threats, homemade rockets, mortars, projectiles launched from Gaza or Lebanon with ranges of dozens of kilometers. Each interceptor costs approximately $50,000. The Iron Dome was not designed to be perfect, it was designed to be economically rational. You spend $50,000 to neutralize a rocket that perhaps cost $2,000 to build. Expensive in absolute terms, but defensible in strategic terms. The second layer is David's Sling. It operates at medium altitude and range, designed for medium-range ballistic threats. Missiles that arrive faster, higher, and on trajectories that Iron Dome cannot cover. Each interceptor costs approximately $1 million. The cost per interception rises significantly, but the system was built to cover the gap between Iron Dome and the upper layer. And the third layer, the one that matters most for what we're analyzing, is the Arrow system. The Arrow 2 operates within the atmosphere, intercepting threats at high altitude before impact. The Arrow 3 operates outside the atmosphere in exoatmospheric space and was specifically designed to destroy long-range ballistic missiles before they re-enter the atmosphere and become progressively harder to intercept. Each Arrow interceptor costs between $2 and $3 million. In April 2024, this system operated near its maximum capacity. 300 projectiles, mostly slow drones and ballistic missiles with predictable trajectories, were detected, tracked, classified, and destroyed in coordination with American and Jordanian forces. It was genuinely impressive. The world watched a multi-layered system deliver a near-perfect result against a massive-scale attack. But here's the detail that nobody said out loud at that moment. The system performed perfectly against exactly the type of threat it was built for. Slow drones with predictable trajectories, ballistic missiles with calculable parabolic arcs, projectiles that radar can track with enough time to complete the interception chain. What the Arrow 3 was not built to do, what none of these layers were designed to solve, is a question that remained open at that moment. And that question has a specific name: hypersonic glide vehicle, a type of threat that doesn't obey the rules that made the Arrow system so effective against what it had faced until then. Now, let's analyze what Iran built. Because understanding the weapon is understanding why the defense, however good it is, was never designed to face it. There is a principle in military intelligence that analysts rarely admit in public. Underestimating the adversary has a cost, and that cost never appears immediately. It appears at the most inconvenient moment possible. What Western analysts did with the Iranian hypersonic program between 2023 and 2025 was exactly that. The price was paid in real combat. Iran didn't reach hypersonic capability overnight. That's the narrative many tell, that the Fatah came from nowhere, that it was a surprise, that the Iranian program had no credibility until suddenly it did. But that reading ignores an evolution perfectly visible to anyone who wanted to see it over a decade. It all started with drones. Iran invested heavily in cheap and numerous unmanned aerial vehicles. The logic was direct and relentless. If you can't compete with Western technology dollar for dollar, you compete with volume. Drones are cheap to produce, hard to track in large numbers, and consume expensive interceptors when they are shot down. The economic asymmetry was deliberate from the start. Each drone destroyed by the Iron Dome represents a profitable transaction for the attacker. After drones came ballistic missiles. Faster, higher, harder to intercept than drones, but still predictable. A ballistic missile follows a parabolic trajectory that can be calculated with reasonable precision from the moment it is detected. With sufficient radar and sufficient time, a system like the Arrow can achieve interception before impact. Iranian ballistic missiles increased the pressure on Israel's defense system, but they did not break its fundamental logic. Then came the Fatah. In May 2023, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, officially unveiled the Fatah 1, Iran's first hypersonic vehicle. The announced specifications were extraordinary: speed between Mach 13 and Mach 15, range of approximately 1,400 kilometers, and the ability to maneuver during the terminal phase of flight. By the end of 2023, the Fatah 2 was announced, an improved version with greater maneuverability and refined guidance. The West's reaction was predictable. Defense analysts in the United States and Europe systematically questioned Iran's claims. The informal consensus that emerged was that Iran was exaggerating the system's capabilities, that the Fatah could reach hypersonic speeds, but it did not possess true hypersonic maneuverability, that its terminal guidance was imprecise, that claims of late-stage flight maneuverability were largely propaganda. The prevailing reading in Western defense circles was, "It's fast, but it's not what they claim it is." And every year that passed with Iran continuing to develop the program, Western analysts continued making the same discount. They continued underestimating, and Iran continued building. There is a historical pattern here worth recognizing. When smaller states announce advanced military capabilities, the Western tendency is to question by default, and not entirely irrationally, because many weapons programs are indeed inflated by propaganda. But the cost of error when you underestimate is profoundly asymmetric. Overestimating a threat results in excessive defensive spending. Underestimating a threat results in discovering your vulnerability at the most inconvenient moment possible. Operationally, in actual combat, the question that remained open was, can the Fatah really maneuver unpredictably at hypersonic speed? Western analysts did not have a definitive answer. The events this video analyzes left no more room for doubt. They were wrong, and the consequences of that error were measured in terms of compromised operational capability, not in points of academic debate. But before getting to the hypersonic salvo itself, we need to understand why hypersonic maneuver is so fundamentally different from any other threat, and why it breaks the mathematics that underpins modern air defense systems. There is a fundamental difference between a ballistic missile and a hypersonic glide vehicle. It is not a question of degrees, it is a question of category. And understanding that difference is understanding why the same defenses that functioned with 99% efficiency in April 2024 faced a problem for which they were simply not designed. A ballistic missile obeys the laws of physics in a way that the defense system can exploit. It is launched, rises to apogee, and descends in a relatively predictable parabolic trajectory. With adequate radars, this trajectory can be calculated with reasonable precision from the moment the projectile is detected. The Arrow 3 was specifically built to exploit this predictability. To intercept ballistic missiles in the exoatmospheric environment, where the interceptor's maneuvering space is ample, and the intercept calculation has time to be completed. It is an elegant solution to a mathematically well-defined problem. A hypersonic glide vehicle subverts this logic in 3 simultaneous dimensions. First, altitude. Unlike ballistic missiles that climb to hundreds of kilometers before descending, hypersonic vehicles fly relatively low in the atmosphere, typically between 40 and 80 kilometers of altitude. This drastically reduces the radar horizon. The detection system has less time to identify the threat simply because the physical horizon limits when the projectile can be seen. Second, velocity. Between Mach 13 and Mach 15, the time window between detection and impact is measured in seconds, not minutes. A conventional ballistic missile can give the defense system 3 to 5 minutes to complete its response. A hypersonic vehicle flying lower and faster compresses that window to less than 90 seconds. Third, and most critical, the terminal maneuver. A hypersonic glide vehicle with genuine maneuvering capability can alter its approach vector during the terminal phase, the final seconds before impact. This breaks the fundamental interception geometry that the entire system was built to exploit. The interceptor isn't chasing the projectile where it is. It's calculating where it will be. If the trajectory changes after the calculation was made, the solution is invalidated. You need to calculate a new solution with time that doesn't exist. The interception chain, detect, track, calculate, launch, guide, intercept, has a time cost at every link. Against a predictable target, this chain works because the total time available exceeds the total cost of the chain. Against a low-altitude hypersonic vehicle with terminal maneuvering, the chain exists, but the time available to complete it is less than the time the process requires. This isn't a software problem. It's not a training failure. It's physics and geometry, 2 fields that don't respond to patch requests. The Arrow 3 was optimized to do exactly what it was designed to do. Pitting it against a maneuverable hypersonic vehicle that flies lower and faster is asking a tool to solve a problem that wasn't within the scope of its original design. And Iran knew that. The question is, when did they precisely map exactly what the system could and couldn't do? Now that you understand the physics, what makes a hypersonic fundamentally difficult to intercept with current tools, we can return to April 2024 with a completely different question. Not, how did the system stop 300? But rather, what did Iran learn by launching those 300? Operation True Promise was Iran's first large-scale direct attack on Israeli territory in modern history. 300 projectiles, a mix of slow drones and ballistic missiles. In the dominant Western narrative, it was a spectacular failure. The system worked. Iran was humiliated. The proof was in the numbers. But military analysts experienced in electronic warfare doctrine observed something different in the attack profile. The slow drone component was numerically too significant to be merely simple saturation. Slow drones are easy to shoot down, and Iran knew that. But while in flight, drones emit radar signals, trigger responses from defense systems, and allow any adequate observation system to record exactly where the radars respond, in what sequence interceptors are launched, and which system layers activate in response to which threat envelopes. Tactical defeat can mask strategic data collection, and if you know where the radar systems are positioned, in what sequence the multi-layered defense system responds, which layers communicate with which, and in how much time, you can begin to model how to create a saturation event that paralyzes coordination between layers. Not by destroying the radars, not by attacking the launchers, simply by creating a volume of simultaneous threats that exceeds the coordinated response capacity of the architecture. Pay attention to this detail, because this is where the interpretation changes completely. 6 months later, in October 2024, came Operation True Promise 2. This time, approximately 180 ballistic missiles, different composition, evolved attack profile. The result was different from the first attack. The system was more stressed. Partial penetration was confirmed in open areas. Analysts noted that the evolved profile was consistent with incorporation of observational data from the first attack. 2 attacks, 2 data sets, a learning curve documenting the capability and operational limits of the world's most advanced defense system. This is the calibration doctrine, a methodical approach that treats each engagement not as an end in itself, but as a data point on a learning curve. You attack. You observe the response. You adjust the next attack based on what you learned. It's slow, it's patient, and it is, in many respects, more strategically sophisticated than a single overwhelming offensive that can be intercepted and defeated before you understand why. So the question that followed was not simply, will Iran attack again? The question was, what were they calibrating for? What did they need to learn before deploying their most advanced weapon? And the answer was 10 hypersonic missiles, launched within minutes, designed against a defense system whose response patterns Iran had mapped with increasing precision over the course of 2 previous attacks. We've arrived at the center of the video, the event the title promises. And to understand the mechanism, why 10 hypersonics achieve what 300 did not, we need something the headlines don't provide: the logic of time. A multi-layered defense system like Israel's doesn't function as a single monolithic block that simply intercepts everything that approaches. It functions like an orchestra where each instrument has its moment, its envelope, its precise sequence. The Iron Dome responds to low-altitude and short-range threats. David's sling responds to medium-range and altitude threats. The Arrow responds to long-range and high-speed threats in high-altitude envelopes. Each layer has a specific engagement window. Before it, the projectile hasn't reached interception range. After it, it's too late. For the system to function, each layer needs time to detect the threat, classify it, calculate a geometrically viable interception solution, and launch the interceptor with sufficient margin to guide it to the target. And critically, the number of simultaneous engagements each battery can manage within a single time window is finite. It is not infinite. It is finite, and that limit is determined by hardware, by software, and by the physics of response time. Here is what a hypersonic salvo of 10 synchronized missiles does to that architecture. Imagine that all 10 vehicles are launched with timing calculated to ensure that they all arrive at the terminal defense envelope within a compressed time, interval 60 to 90 seconds. Not to destroy the interception systems, not to overwhelm the radars with sheer volume. The objective is to force the system to process more simultaneous engagement decisions than its response architecture can execute within the available time window. The Arrow 3 has multiple engagement capability. It can track and respond to more than one target at the same time. But that capability has an operational ceiling. And when you combine simultaneous volume with the three factors we discussed, low flight altitude that compresses the detection horizon, drastically reduced response window, and unpredictable terminal trajectory that invalidates already calculated interception solutions, you are not simply stressing the system with volume. You are destroying the fundamental hypothesis under which the entire architecture was designed to operate. That hypothesis was, there will be sufficient time to complete the interception chain. With conventional ballistic missiles arriving in sequence, that hypothesis was sustainable. With 10 hypersonic vehicles arriving simultaneously, on routes that change in the terminal phase, with a total response window of less than 2 minutes from detection, the hypothesis ceases to be true. Defense analysts who studied the use of the Russian Kinzhal hypersonic missile against Ukrainian positions observed the same operational pattern. It is not speed alone that saturates the defense. It is the combination of speed, maneuver, and synchronization of multiple vectors that creates the collapse of the decision window. You can have a system capable of handling each of these variables individually, but when they all arrive at the same time, in the same window, directed against a system that was calibrated with data from 2 previous attacks, the architecture reaches and exceeds its operational limit. The result of an engagement of this type is not necessarily the destruction of all intended targets, but it is the penetration of some. And in the context of a system that was presented to the world as capable of stopping everything Iran could launch, penetrating anything is a paradigm shift with consequences that extend far beyond immediate material damage. Useless in the title of this video does not mean destroyed. It means something technically precise and strategically decisive. The system was operationally overwhelmed. It was not struck down as infrastructure. It was not erased electronically. But it failed to execute its fundamental function: complete protection of airspace against a threat for which it was never designed and against which it was deployed with calibration information that the attacker had meticulously collected. There is a dimension of modern warfare that rarely appears in headlines, but that determines the outcome of prolonged conflicts: the arithmetic of stockpiles. Recall the costs we detailed earlier. Arrow 3 between 2 and 3 million per interceptor. David's Sling approximately 1 million. Iron Dome 50,000. These are not maintenance costs or infrastructure amortization, they are consumables. Each launch permanently removes a projectile from available stockpiles. And the stockpiles are finite. Israel cannot simply place an order and receive more Arrow 3 interceptors in 24 hours. The Arrow 3 is co-developed with the United States, produced on an assembly line with limited capacity, and the production and replacement cycle is measured in months, not weeks. Resupply is also politically conditioned. It depends on American export approvals, logistical availability, and geopolitical priorities that can shift depending on the political environment in Washington. This means that each engagement, even an engagement won with high interception rate, drains a resource that does not resupply instantaneously. And Iran can produce drones and ballistic missiles at a fraction of the per-unit cost that Israel and the United States need to spend to shoot them down. Let's do the arithmetic of the April 2024 attack. 300 projectiles intercepted. Considering multiple interceptors per target in many cases, standard practice to ensure interception, the conservative tally easily reaches hundreds of millions of dollars in interceptors consumed in a single night. Iran spent a fraction of that to build what it launched. That asymmetry is not an accident, it is the strategy. The objective is not to win tactical battles. It is to force the opponent to spend expensive, finite, and slow-to-replenish resources to defend against cheap, reproducible, and scalable resources. It is economic attrition applied to the most expensive military hardware in the world. What this means in operational terms is profound. Even when Israel's defense system functions perfectly, as it did in April 2024, Israel may be strategically losing the war of attrition. Each victory of interception reduces the stockpile available for the next engagement. The United States is the guarantor of last resort, the resupply partner Israel relies on to keep stocks above operational thresholds. But American resupply is not instantaneous. It is not politically unlimited, and it is contested by other simultaneous commitments: Taiwan, Ukraine, the growing demands of the Indo-Pacific. The American capacity to maintain all of these commitments at the same time is a hypothesis that military planners are already openly questioning in unclassified reports. The open question is not whether Israel can win a specific engagement. The question is what happens when stocks fall below operational thresholds before the conflict ends, or before resupply arrives. But the erosion of stocks does not happen in a vacuum. It happens in front of an audience, and each regional actor observing this calculation is drawing its own conclusions about what Western systems can still deliver. Let's zoom out on the map and analyze what that demonstration signaled beyond Tel Aviv. When Iran demonstrates that it can penetrate Israeli air defense with a hypersonic salvo, the message does not arrive just at Tel Aviv. It reaches Riyadh, where Saudi Arabia is in a process of normalization with Israel while calculating its regional alignment. It reaches Abu Dhabi, which hosts American military bases and whose security depends on assumptions about the effectiveness of Western defenses. It reaches Amman, whose forces actively participated in the interception in April 2024. It reaches Ankara, which operates within NATO but maintains open lines of communication with Tehran. For these actors, the question that the hypersonic event raises is not theoretical. It is direct. Is the American and Israeli security umbrella I relied on still trustworthy? Before this event, the answer was presumed to be yes, based on solid operational evidence. The Arrow system had stopped 300 missiles. There was precedent. There was proof of concept at real scale. After the hypersonic salvo, the calculation changes because the precedent has been rewritten. The same system that stopped 300 did not contain 10 of a different category. This is a paradigm shift for any defense planner in the region who was relying on certain assumptions about what Western systems can do. And the actors watching are not just allies. They are also adversaries now calculating their own implications. North Korea has an active hypersonic program in development. China possesses multiple operational hypersonic glide vehicles. Pakistan is developing advanced ballistic missile capabilities. For each of these actors, what Iran demonstrated has immense strategic value. Hypersonic saturation doctrine can work against advanced defense systems co-developed by the United States. What Iran did was not merely attack Israel. It published, under real combat conditions, with verifiable results, the operational manual for how to break the multi-layered defense architecture the West developed over decades. This is not in a classified intelligence file. It is an empirical result visible to the world. For deterrence to work, the potential aggressor must believe that the attack will likely fail. When a real combat result contradicts that belief with observable evidence, deterrence loses force, not immediately, not absolutely, but measurably. And that erosion does not reverse easily with press releases. Here's what is more disturbing than the hypersonic attack itself. It was not the objective. It was a tool within a much larger strategy. And if you are focusing on the missiles, you are looking in the wrong place. Iran is not trying to destroy Israel in a conventional offensive. It does not have the capacity to do so, and Iranian strategists know this perfectly well. What Iran is executing is something methodologically different, a long-term attrition strategy that does not need tactical victories to produce cumulative strategic results over time. The operational structure is the axis of resistance, the network of proxies and allies that the IRGC maintains from Lebanon to Yemen. Passing through Iraq and Gaza, each component of this network serves to impose costs on the opponent across multiple fronts simultaneously. Hezbollah in the north, Hamas in Gaza, Houthis in the Red Sea disrupting global commerce, Iraqi militias pressing American forces in Iraq. None of these actors need to win their individual battles to fulfill the strategic function. They need to persist, and by persisting, they drain military, economic, and political resources from their opponents on an ongoing basis. Hypersonic missiles fit into this doctrine not as battle-deciding weapons, but as cost multipliers and as instruments of demonstration. Each hypersonic salvo that penetrates Israeli defenses does three things at once. It consumes expensive interceptors, it politically strains the relationship between Israel and its American guarantors, and it publicly demonstrates the limitations of the system that was presented as invincible. It is not a weapon of immediate victory. It is a weapon of attrition, of credibility erosion, and of signaling. Look at the Russian parallel. The Kinzhal missile, Russian hypersonic, was deployed in Ukraine in specific high-value attacks, not in mass bombardments. The objective was to demonstrate penetration capability and create an operational precedent, not to replace the entire conventional arsenal. The strategic principle is analogous to what Iran executes. The hypersonic serves to break the premise that Western defenses are impenetrable. This has psychological and strategic value that far transcends the material damage of any individual attack. What Iranian doctrine combines is economic attrition, technological demonstration, and pressure on multiple simultaneous fronts. None of these dimensions alone is sufficient to produce a conventional victory. But the combination of all three creates an equation that becomes progressively more difficult for the opponent to sustain over time, especially when the opponent depends on external resupply guarantees that have their own limits. This is not a question about a missile exchange. It's a question about who runs out of options first, who exhausts resources, political will, or defensive capacity before the other. So, what would close the gap? Let's analyze what would be necessary and what doesn't yet exist. Defense experts converge on three categories of solution, each with its own time horizon and its own implementation complexity. First category: directed energy weapons. High-powered lasers capable of destroying projectiles in flight have a radically lower operational cost than conventional interceptors. The cost per laser shot is on the order of dollars, not millions. Defensive laser systems are in advanced development and already have operational prototypes, but no system at sufficient scale for area protection has been operationally deployed. The transition from prototype to a robust, certified operational system integrated into existing defense architecture takes years, not months. Second category: next-generation radar architectures. Radar horizon is the central problem against low-altitude threats. Airborne radars, constellations of early warning satellites in low orbit, and distributed sensor networks can extend the detection horizon and give the defense system more time. But building, launching, and integrating this infrastructure into an operational defense system is a program of a decade, not a year. Third category: AI-assisted interception chains. If the central problem is that the time window to complete the interception chain is insufficient for human decision-making speed, the solution is to accelerate the links in that chain with autonomous systems operating in milliseconds. These systems are in advanced development, but integration with legacy weapon systems and the challenges of operational reliability are profoundly complex, and the implications of autonomous weapon systems have their own political and ethical dimensions that delay deployment. The acceleration problem is simple and brutal. While defenses develop these solutions, attackers continue improving their offensive systems. The Fata 2 is an enhanced version of the Fata 1, and the development cadence won't stop because defenses haven't yet closed the gap. Offensive movement and defensive movement are in a race, and at this moment, defense is behind. 300, the world celebrated. 10, the world fell silent. The difference between these two numbers is not one of size, it's one of category. And that category has a name no press release can erase: structural gap. The question is not whether this gap can be closed. With sufficient time, investment, and technology, it probably can. The question is whether it closes before the next attack or after. But there's a detail that makes this race structurally unfavorable for defense. The attacker needs to succeed once to change the calculation. Defense needs to succeed always to maintain what it had before. This asymmetry in the success pattern is the real problem, and it's what none of the three solutions we discussed resolves immediately. The next chapter of this story is already being written. If you want to follow it when it happens, subscribe and turn on notifications. This analysis